Good afternoon. I'm Kim Ogg, Harris County District Attorney. You know, people hate public corruption because generally it involves theft of taxpayer money, money that we've collectively entrusted to those we elect and those that we hire to be our government. And these kinds of crimes weaken the public's trust in the government itself. But this case is worse than that. Today, 5 people have been charged with 2 counts each of engaging in organized criminal activity, and all face first or third degree felony charges that can carry sentences ranging from 2 years to life imprisonment. They are accused of running a fraudulent teacher certification testing scheme right here in Houston that utilized a test-taking proxy or teacher impersonator to take the test, along with a corrupt testing proctor to allow the switch between the applicant and the proxy test taker. This was used to certify more than 200 unqualified teachers, all now practicing or having practiced here in our Texas public schools and in districts across the state. Worse yet, the cheating teachers include at least 2 sexual predators who, once falsely certified, had access through their employment to underage kids on campus and off. One has been charged with indecency with a child, another with online solicitation. The 5 individuals charged are Vincent Grayson, the head boys basketball coach at Booker T. Washington, where he's worked for nearly 20 years. He is the kingpin and organizer of this scheme. Tawana Guilford Mason, also charged. She worked at H-Tech, Houston Training and Education Center, where she was the proctor who allowed an impersonator to sit for the exams instead of the actual teacher applicants. Nicholas Newton, an assistant principal at Booker T. Washington, was the test applicant's proxy or impersonator. Darian Nicole White acted also as a corrupt testing proctor at one of the centers. And finally, LaShonda Roberts, an assistant principal at Yates High School, is charged as a recruiter and referral agent who brought in many individuals who sought the services of the impersonator test taker. This scheme goes back, as far as our investigation can take it, to May 2020, which, as you recall, was right at the beginning of the world shutdown for the COVID pandemic. The extent of this scheme will never be fully known, but we know that at least 400 tests were taken and at least 200 teachers falsely certified. We know that the co-defendants collectively profited in the amount of at least $1 million. You know, the most interesting irony to me in this circle of greed is that in spite of the perpetrators being the type of people that we trust our kids with, educators, it was actually a good Samaritan with a conscience that brought this scheme to light. A former coach applying as a police officer in a different part of Texas had an attack of conscience and came forward with a scheme that was apparently well known among teacher applicants wanting to be certified, and busted this phony test-taking scheme right out of the water. I want to thank the TEA for reaching out to the Office of the Attorney General, and I want to thank the Office of the Attorney General for reaching out to my office and our Public Corruption Division. I'd like to introduce Mike Levine, an Assistant District Attorney in our Public Corruption Division, and I'd like to thank him myself for working on this case for more than a year so that we can prevent future exploitation of our most precious resource, Texas school children.
Kim. Thank you all for being here. I would like to thank the lead investigator, Mr. John Combs, and Kyle Swihart at the AG's office, who did a lot of work on this case. I'd also like to thank DA investigators, fraud examiners, who pore over spreadsheets and banking information that's not always fascinating, but really holds the devil is in the detail. And also thank you to the security chiefs and investigators at both TEA and their vendor Pearson VUE, who assisted every step of the way in uncovering the extent of this fraud. In mid-2023, TEA became aware of certain irregularities at HTEC, which is Houston's Training and Education Center. That's an approved location for Texas teaching candidates to take their certification exams. A specific tip, as DA Ogg just mentioned, then followed, put some more meat on the bones, and this investigation ensued. TEA, Pearson, and the investigators soon began to recognize a pattern. Numerous teacher certification candidates seemed to fit the same criteria, where they would drive from far-flung cities, sometimes from Dallas-Fort Worth or farther. Often these people had previously failed one or more attempts at the certification exam. They then drove, sometimes 4 or more hours, to the Houston area, and suddenly they were passing the test with flying colors. The tip eventually led to an email address, a Zelle, a Cash App, a phone number, and eventually identified some of the defendants that we're about to talk about. The scope of this investigation has been broad. Investigators have interviewed dozens of teachers. Approximately 20 teachers have cooperated, and all told very similar, near identical versions of events. And investigators have reviewed literally thousands of pages of bank records, phone records, etc. As DA Ogg mentioned, the organizer and kingpin of the scheme was Vincent Grayson, coach and teacher at Booker T, Washington. He was able to bribe an employee, Tawana Guilford Mason, at the HTEC testing center. Incidentally, that's a person who's been previously prosecuted for bribery in Harris County 20 years ago in an unrelated case. The way the scheme worked is TEA certification candidates would pay Grayson, usually $2,500. He in turn would forward roughly 20% of that money to Guilford Mason for her willingness to allow the cheating to occur. The candidate would then be instructed by Grayson where and when exactly to test. They would come, show ID, sign in, and leave. A few minutes later, Nicholas Newton, the proxy tester, would sit in their seat, take and pass the test that they felt they could not. On occasion, Mr. Newton would take more than one test. In fact, when he was caught red-handed in February of 2024, he was logged into one test. He said to investigators, "Well, look at the screen behind you," and he was logged in as a different person, taking another test on another terminal that same day. So to summarize these defendants, Vincent Grayson is the kingpin. He's made $1,090,000 from this scheme, as best we can tell, and it's almost certainly more than that because there's cash as well here, which is harder to trace. Tawana Guilford Mason, the testing proctor and compliance certification officer for HTEC, was paid at least $125,000 by Mr. Grayson via more than 350 separate transactions on Zelle and Cash App. Nicholas Newton, the proxy test taker, was paid over $188,000 from May of 2020 through February of 2024. And our best estimates are that he took over 430 certification tests fraudulently impersonating teachers that paid for those services. As I mentioned, he was caught more or less red-handed, and he gave essentially a full confession. LaShonda Roberts is charged as a recruiter and referral agent who knowingly sent business into the scheme. Records indicate, and the evidence leads us to believe, she sent over 90 teachers into the scheme, and she personally sent over $267,000 to Mr. Grayson, frequently profiting along the way. And finally, the main testing center where this took place, like you heard me say, it was called HTEC, was shut down in mid-2023 as suspicious activity mounted. Rather than ending the scheme, Vincent Grayson went and found a new location where they could continue the scheme. That's where defendant Darian Wilhite comes in. She was a young proctor working at a different testing center known as Tactics in Houston. She willingly participated and accepted cash bribes in the amount of approximately $250 each time that she let somebody sign in, leave, and let someone test in their place. All 5 defendants face 2 counts of engaging. One is based on money laundering because they profited over $300,000. That is a first-degree felony. And the second charge that each defendant faces is also engaging in organized criminal activity based on tampering with a government document. That's based on the false statements that are made when you sit down and test knowing you're not the person that you say you are. We have not seized accounts, but the investigation is ongoing, and we would encourage anyone who thinks they have additional information to come forward, to contact us or to contact Crime Stoppers and make sure the information makes its way to investigators. Thank you.
All right, hang on just 1 second. Ken, he's out. He's got names and names. Right back there, move on.
Okay, yeah. So you mentioned Nicholas Newton took about 430 tests in the span of this scheme. When he gave his confession to you all as investigators, did he give a why? Of course, you mentioned $188,000, but I mean, the kingpin you're mentioning made over $1 million.
Isn't it? I'm not sure whether the test taker knew exactly how much the kingpin made, but it was for money, and that was the why. Financial hard times, and saw an opportunity to make almost $200,000. A lot of people could use that kind of money.
Yeah, we talk about teacher certifications. We've done several investigations on Channel 13 about it. And of course, now you hear this. I mean, what are your thoughts about this scheme and the fact that people were faking certifications in a time where we need teachers and we're having these conversations about the struggles of finding teachers that are qualified to teach our kids?
Well, it's very troubling, right? Because a teacher, especially teachers and coaches who help influence children's behavior, we count on them for their moral compass, right? A part of what they do goes beyond their mastery of their subject matter. To think that this many people without what I would consider a proper moral compass were trying to educate and influence children all across the state is definitely troubling.
More than 200 teachers, you guys mentioned, have this fake certification. They knew they had this fake certification, correct? Could they be facing criminal charges?
What I can tell you is that our criminal investigation covers the people we've announced today and other people who directly profited from the scheme. That's the ongoing part of our investigation. The teachers will have to deal with TEA. TEA will deal with the licensure part of the examination. They are going to go over every teacher, I'm sure, and take whatever action they see fit if they believe someone fraudulently obtained a certification.
What was the perk for these teachers? Like, was it that they needed the certification to keep their employment? Was it that they were going to get a better salary? Like, because you could be uncertified.
That's right, but in most districts, after a period of time, you need a certification, or you get a higher paying job with the certification. But yes, it's all of those things you said. Better jobs, better opportunities, higher salary, exactly.
Who shut down that testing center?
So when all of these irregularities began to appear, Pearson and TEA essentially said, you cannot give these tests anymore. And that was almost the vast majority of the tests they gave were those tests, so that effectively told them they couldn't give Pearson or TEA tests anymore.
And then you mentioned something about the indecent assault with a student. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. You know, one of the dangers of letting anybody in with the certification is they have immediate access to underage kids. And so 2 of the test takers have been prosecuted for sexual-related crimes against children. And it was this access through the certification, which was false, that allowed them to commit the crimes. So, you know, we have seen rapists posing as cops. We've seen rapists posing as teachers. This is more the same. And I will tell you the damage, and that's really what I want to get to. To me, the damage is not just to the education system, which is under great duress right now, but it's actually to the families of the children who go to those schools, who trust our government to educate their kids and to keep them safe for 8 hours a day, and it just destroys that kind of faith that our community has in public schools. And I think that's where obviously the greatest damage is to the individual child victims, and we only know of those 2 cases now, but there could be others. And that's why we encourage you to call if there's anyone with information about these phony certifications, to call the local police or to call Crime Stoppers, where we can get the information back. And whether the teachers are prosecuted or not, the most important thing to me is that the ringleaders have been identified and are being rooted out of our home school district, HISD. And the fact that they held positions of power there, where they were held in esteem by the children, is the very worst part of this crime. They didn't deserve those kids' respect, and I think it leaves children feeling betrayed, not knowing who to trust. Sorry.
So sorry. Are they all in custody?
We believe many of them were picked up today. There may be one or more that's not yet in custody.
And it was like a grand jury indictment?
That's right.
And you think that these uncertified teachers are now in districts all over the state?
Yes. Thank you.
Or fraudulently certified?
The fraudulently certified teachers run the gamut. They're not just in the Houston area. They're not just in the Dallas area. They are literally littered throughout the state. And I'm certain that TEA is going to follow up on a licensure investigation with anyone that they feel is not properly licensed.
And the new center where they kind of switched the scheme to, it's still operating and open?
I actually don't think so. I think that they've had to shut down as a result of their employee taking bribes. There's not so much suspicion on the whole business. They may be able to open again, but certainly that one employee is going to be facing charges.
And I'd like to ask Michael to elaborate, if you will, on the difference in pay between somebody in a non-certified position and what types of teachers we saw using this phony scheme.
Sure. So one of the things that we saw, frequently teachers might be able to get hired at first without a certification, but they have a certain time limit. Hey, within 1 or 2 years you have to get your certification. Other times we'd see people put in positions that don't require a certification. Maybe you're the paraprofessional, the teacher's aide in the classroom. You're somebody who watches kids in school suspension, and it's generally a much lower paying job. So someone might be making $20,000, $30,000 a year, and now suddenly they have an opportunity to triple their salary, but of course they have to pass the certification test, right? That directly led to people wanting to take advantage of this scheme.
The TEA told me that it's teachers that are for special education and bilingual teachers that have to have their certifications. Is there any indication that any of those two types of teachers were able to pass through this scheme?
There's definitely a lot of special ed certification, but we saw examples of cheating on almost every certification test. Social studies, history, a lot of folks on the PPR, which is a test almost all teachers need to take, so it ran the gamut.
So how much were they paying to have this test taken?
That's a good question.
All different amounts, but for the most part, $2,500. I think the scheme started a little less than that. I think for the last 4 years, the kingpin, Mr. Grayson, was charging $2,500, and then there's cases where people paid more. There's cases where other intermediaries charged people, an extra $1,000 for themselves before forwarding the rest on to the people running the scheme.
Greed knew no boundaries in this case. If you've got an assistant principal, a head coach, and others posing as certified teachers, we just aren't going to be able to calculate the damage there. But we know that further investigation is needed, and we look forward to the TEA taking the responsible and necessary approach to getting these teachers out of our schools and away from kids. Thank you all very much.